You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. And today we're talking to the man that's behind this book, Kennie Prince and the Poacher's Nightmare, a book with some chapters with titles like this: A Game Warden in the Making, The Job of a Lifetime, and Deer, Dope, and Beer, Operation Triangle. Thanks for tuning in. We're in for a fun ride.
This episode of the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast is brought to you by the Foundation for Mississippi Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks.
Welcome to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm Matt Wyatt, your host. And listen, this is interesting. Now, trapping, nuisance animals, and oh, by the way, catching poachers. Yeah, all of that in one show with Kennie Prince here at Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. Kennie, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me, Matt.
Well, where should we start? I mean, because you were here at MDWFP for an entire career and have retired, and I'm not so sure that you aren't involved with more stuff now than you were then. Where should we start?
I'm still going strong, so.
Yeah. So how many years did you work here at MDWFP?
I worked 26 years here with the department.
And in those 26 years here at MDWFP, kind of tell us what you did.
Well, I was fortunate, and a lot of people wouldn't say it that way, but I went to work as a fisheries technician. I wanted to be a game warden.
Okay.
But I started off in the fisheries division, which educated me on a lot of things to do with fisheries in the department and in the state of Mississippi that I didn't have any idea about. I learned so much there. After my time in fisheries, were actually one of the stories that we'll be talking about later probably, but Jim Lipe was a game biologist, and he was catching alligators, and they had one they couldn't catch, and, well, being young and kind of poked my chest out a little bit, I said, well, I can help you catch him. And after I showed Jim how to catch him, he was like, where'd you learn that? I said, well, I wasn't always working for the Department of Wildlife. But after my time in the game division and learning so much from the biologists there, I finally had an opening in law enforcement that I was able to transfer to and start my career in law enforcement.
Okay. Now, so they have an alligator they could not catch. Why couldn't they catch it? Too big?
He was just spooky. And the way we used to catch him then primarily was with a snare pole. And I showed him how to hook him. And again,
so you had some experience with that type of thing before you got here?
Yeah, that was years ago. They used to hire people, they said, because they couldn't catch them. So it wasn't so much that, but I grew up on the Pearl River in the swamps. My daddy kept me hunting and fishing all my life, and I honestly didn't know there was anything wrong with catching alligators until somebody told me.
Yeah. So when you got into law enforcement here at MDWFP, kind of take me back to that, what that transit, when you kind of step into the law enforcement world, what was that, what like for a young person like you?
Well, I couldn't believe they were paying me to do that. I was having so much fun, and I'd stay out all night, chasing headlighters or working on Pearl River or Ross Barnett Reservoir with boating in the summertime. And matter of fact, myself and some of the other young officers, they had to tell us to take off. We wanted to work so much. But it was, to me, it was just a way of God blessing my life because I was getting paid for what I love to do.
All right. And so that kind of is a nice transition, leads us into your book that you've written here. You're now retired. Now, I guess full-time kind of working for yourself.
Right.
In nuisance animal control, that kind of thing. But so that has given you an opportunity to write a book called The Poacher's Nightmare. What gave you... what was sort of the genesis of deciding, okay, my experiences in law enforcement, undercover game warden work, I'm going to write a book about that. What led you to write a book? Well,
I'm fortunate enough. I speak a good bit at churches and things like that, wild game suppers. And normally after I'd get through speaking, somebody would say, you need to write a book about some of your stories. But I finally put pen to paper, and with the help of James Cummins, who was my editor, we got it done. So It took several years, but it's out there now. So
okay. And it's a book full of stories like what?
Well, it starts off with my career, or actually before that. I started trapping when I was 8 years old for fur bearers. And throughout my hunting, and I became a guide in Colorado when I was 17. I actually sold my deer rifle to go hunting on a mule deer hunt, bow hunting. And after I killed one, the man offered me a job to work for him because I was spending all my time tracking deer for him. So I went back out there and guided for 4 years while I was going to college. And while I was in college, my daddy had a friend who worked in fisheries, Tom McCrary, who told him about an opening in the fisheries division. He said, I want to be a game warden. And that's how I actually got on. Mr. Tom McCrary sent me here for an interview, and I think there was 3 of us, and I got the job. So
okay. So in this book, stories of basically in law enforcement, right? And you tell me catching people in the middle of the night, breaking the law, doing things, spotlighting. You mentioned those kinds of things. Is there a story you can kind of share with me? Well, I guess without giving the entire book away, that sort of illustrates what's in there.
Well, like I said, I touch on my fisheries career, the wildlife career, and then law enforcement. But later on in my career, I went to it started off as a task force, and then we called it special operations.
Okay.
And I had no background in undercover work, but I started doing some undercover work. And fortunately, I was able to work a lot with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on waterfowl cases and such as that. But one of the most unique things that I had take place, probably, I had one guy that I was chasing all the time that was a commercial fisherman. This is why I was still in uniform. When I say chased him all the time, it was kind of like the sheepdog and the coyote on an old cartoon. I'd see him, we'd talk, but I knew he was the bad guy, and he knew I was the game warden. So, yeah. But
did he know that you knew he was the bad guy?
He knew I was after him.
Okay.
I had caught him a few times with some minor violations, but I had a young officer with me one night, and we were out on the Ross Barnett Reservoir, which was illegal to set nets on.
Okay.
So that's what he did for a living, was commercial fish. And we got out there on the water, and the young officer, I heard the boat. I knew it was the man that we were after. And anyway, after we heard the boat, heard the nets hitting the side of the boat and everything, we heard the boat crank up, which at night you can hear forever. And the young officer said he's going the other way. I said, no, he's coming this way. No. So we argued just a little bit, and finally he won, and I took off. Well, I was running without any lights. The guy that was doing the commercial fisherman didn't have any lights on, and we could have high-fived each other when we met in the river channel, and which I chased him for a little while, and he knew the river better than the fish did, so he got away. And the next morning I was drinking coffee at the local store, and I saw him walk in, and when he walked by, he went to sit down with all the other guys over there that wouldn't sit with the game warden, and he walked by me, and he kind of looked over at me, and he said, you mind if I sit down here? And I said, no, have a seat. He sat down, he looked at me, he said, that was awful close last night. So we got a good laugh out of it. And I chased him for many years and caught him several times. And he started going to church with me later on. And we became very good friends. He taught me more about illegal commercial fishing than I could have learned in any school.
Isn't that something? Became friends after that whole experience.
Oh, I wrote him several more tickets, and he would go pay his fines and pick his nets up at my house. I'd just tell him, you can get your nets when you pay your ticket. He'd go by whether I was there or not and pick them up.
Isn't that something? You mentioned, illegal putting nets out at Ross Barnett, for example, and he was a commercial fisherman. What kind of fish was he, catching at Ross Barnett with those nets commercially?
He was primarily after buffalo and catfish.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what he was after.
The biggest market would have been the catfish, but buffalo sold well then as well.
Yeah. What was it like being, I guess during the day, going from in uniform to, at night, and at other times being undercover and not in uniform?
Well, the undercover part of it was actually posing as an outlaw, more or less, or a buyer, depending on who we were working. I'd say probably the biggest thing we probably worked was the sale of white-tailed deer, the meat,
okay,
which is still a big thing, as well as the sale of crappie. while I was still working in the, I'm going to say mid-'90s to early 2000s, crappie, black market crappie would sell for about $1 to $1.50 a pound. But time it traveled out of state, they were getting as high as $6 and $7 a pound for it in the upper Northeast.
Is that right?
Yeah, so it was going all the way to Wisconsin.
Now, was
Illinois.
that the fillets or the whole fish?
The dressed fish were bringing the best prices, but they were selling it under another name up there. So we started actually a rolling storefront where we set up a business. Mississippi and the department in Louisiana, we worked a joint investigation together, worked up and down each side of the Mississippi River. That lasted for about 2 years. And with my background in trapping, I knew a lot about furs and buying furs. We set up a route buying furs, legal furs. And we were actually turning around and selling the legal stuff, which led into buying deer meat, raccoon meat, which is legal. Raccoon meat is, not the deer meat.
Okay.
And then in the spring, we started buying fish. We'd buy legal fish, which would open a door to somebody that may be selling illegal fish, such as crappie. So that went on for about 2 years, and we were working that in conjunction with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, because anytime it crossed the state line, we would document Lacey Act violations, which is a federal offense.
Okay.
And if the value was of a certain amount or more, it became a felony. And at the end of that investigation, I think we arrested right at 140 people.
Wow.
So
that is amazing. Were there ever times, you mentioned one story where it was an individual who you actually knew each other and crossed paths. Were there ever any close calls in that kind of work?
Not much. I would say, and I say that all the time today, a uniformed officer has a lot more to be, there's a lot more danger because he doesn't know if he's just checking people, he doesn't know what he's walking into.
Right.
Whereas like an undercover situation, something could go wrong at any time, but most of the time you knew who you were dealing with, and if they thought there was something wrong, they weren't going to have anything to do with you.
Right.
Now sometimes there were things that would happen that could turn it the wrong way, but for the most part, I would say I was always safer working undercover than I was in uniform.
So Kenny, I was flipping through the chapter titles in the book, and there's one in here that says Deer, Dope, and Beer, Operation Triangle. Now, I know I'm asking to give a little bit of the content of the book away, but what's that about?
Well, it was called Operation Triangle because it covered 3 counties. Okay. And it started out as a wildlife investigation. One of the local officers had called special ops and told that he had gotten some information about some guys that were poaching or headlighting and selling deer meat. So we actually went in, set up a camper, and got a lease on a place that we could hunt. And we started hanging out where we knew they would have to drive by our camper every day. And one of the undercover officers that was staying at the camper and acting like he was hunting, we would stop, and I would go, actually, it was just a ruse. Whenever we knew those guys were going to be hanging around or close enough they could see us, I would buy deer from the undercover officer out there so they could see us across the parking lot from a store. They would see us moving deer from one vehicle to the other, and then I'd drive off into the sunset. Well, that turned it kind of perked them, and they started coming over and hanging out with our other undercover. And before long, they were smoking dope, and it turned into we were buying marijuana and ecstasy and deer. And to close the case, which was probably the funniest part of it, if you can call it funny, we wanted to document them headlighting deer. And we went out, and I was sitting in the back seat of the vehicle with a guy I had bought narcotics from, and the Agent Gann was in the front part of the truck with the guy shooting, and Agent Gann was driving, and they would shoot a deer anywhere. It didn't matter. He shot one out of a church cemetery, and then they shot one behind a man's house, and you could actually hear me on audio hollering, "Stop shooting," because what it was, I saw lights come on in the house, and I saw a vehicle cranking up. I'm like, well, they're after us. And we take off running, and thankfully DePerry's good driving, or Agent Gann's good driving, we were able to get away from the landowner, but we didn't know where we were. We got lost on the gravel roads, but we were on the Alabama state line. So we just kept going until we hit a blacktop. We come over a hill, we got beer in the truck, we got dope in the truck, and I see blue lights up ahead. There's a roadblock. They're checking driver's license, and we're in the state of Alabama. And fortunately, good Lord watched over us again. We pull up to the roadblock, which they're hollering for me to throw the dope out, and I'm not about to throw the dope out that I just bought. And we get to the roadblock, and the man in front of us, they had to get him out of the car. He was drunk, and he started fighting with them. And we were in a white Dodge truck, 3 deer in the back of the truck, blood all over the side of the truck from where they had just thrown the deer in the truck. And fortunately, the man in front of us started fighting with them, and all Perry had to do was show him the license. We drove right through the roadblock and got home. So we made it out of another one. So.
Wow, what a story.
It was amazing. But that's where it turned out. We bought ecstasy, crack cocaine, and marijuana, all from those gentlemen there.
Wow.
I guess you could call them gentlemen.
And that's just one of the chapters in that book.
Oh, yeah.
How about that? And the book is called Poacher's Nightmare. How'd you come up with the title?
Well,
pretty obvious, I guess.
That was actually the publisher and my editor, James Cummins, and myself. That took 3 months just to come up with that title. So it wasn't an overnighter.
Sure.
But with the subtitle being Stories of an Undercover Game Warden.
So over the years, you'd had people tell you should write a book after you'd speak. When you'd think about it and imagine the process of putting those stories together, writing a book, how did that match up with what it was actually like going through the process? It
was tedious, to say the least. As far as writing the book itself, I got more stories than most game wardens do. I will say that because we got to work a lot with the FBI, ATF, and other, which U.S. Fish and Wildlife, because we were wildlife oriented. But a lot of our cases would we would start off as just a wildlife case. We bought narcotics. We bought fully automatic weapons. We started one of the biggest, I guess you would say, a fraud case involving some farming activities that the FBI actually prosecuted later on. But one of the FBI agents told me, he was from New York, that had moved down here, transferred down here. He told me that he just couldn't believe he was working with a game warden. And he said until he met game wardens, he didn't realize the knowledge they had. Now, he wasn't talking about me. He was actually talking about, I believe, the late Sammy Fisher, who just recently passed away. But he had been sent to that county, and one of the highway patrolmen had told him, you need to talk to the game warden. He said, this is a homicide investigation we're doing. And he said, well, the game warden knows every road in the county.
How about that?
And he said, I didn't realize what a game warden actually knew. And I think the doors and the gaps that we got to cover by other agencies such as ATF, because anytime we came across illegal weapons or anything like that, we would contact them. They would fund the investigation, which took a load off our back, and we would just continue on with them prosecuting it later whenever we apprehended the violators.
That's amazing. What's the reception been like for the book so far?
Well, so far it's been real good. I've been surprised because I think a couple of months ago they had the top 10 in the state, and it was in the top 10.
Yeah,
it was number 10, but still to me that was that meant something, just being in the top whatever. But that may have only been 10 books published. I don't know, but
sure.
No, I'm just. But you know that meant something right there, and I've had people from all over the country that have contacted me that have gotten it off of Amazon or something and have been reading it.
So it's available on Amazon and local bookstores as well?
Local books. I think Barnes & Nobles carries it. University Press website, you can get it off of it. But so far, it seems like it's doing real well.
Yeah, that's great. So that's in there. It kind of covers that stories and span of your career. But you retired. When did you retire?
I retired in 2009.
Okay, 2009. And so since then, it's not like you just stay at home and garden since you
No.
retired, right? Tell us what you've been doing since then.
Well, I do nuisance animal control work. Like I said, I started trapping in 1968.
You said you started trapping at 8 years old.
Yeah, that's when I caught my first beaver.
Was he as big as you were?
Just about.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I do that type of work now. I also still get to help with the Mississippi Department of Wildlife with the cadet training, mainly talking about trapping, but just to encourage them. And
so trapping, that's something, you know, I know what it means basically. I don't know really anything about it. So in our state, in the state of Mississippi, what does that entail? Is it just nuisance? Is there other things that go into the trapping kind of world? Like, what does that entail?
Well, the biggest thing as far as people look at trapping in a lot of different ways, it's a management tool for any other type of wildlife. You got predators such as coyotes, bobcats, raccoons, possums,
Wild
skunks.
hogs?
Well,
they're not
hogs,
predators, I guess.
I trap them as well, but they do more agricultural damage than anything. But a lot of your hunting clubs are getting into trapping programs where they're trying to manage for turkeys or white-tailed deer.
Okay.
And when they do that, if they don't have somebody trapping to kind of keep the nest predators and the other predators such as coyotes and bobcats in control, then they're just being futile in when their efforts there.
Sure. The difference between trapping, say, for coyotes and bobcats versus beaver. And obviously one's going to involve water all the time.
Right.
But what are the major differences in those trapping those different types of species?
Well, when you're trapping for predators, you're primarily land trapping.
Okay.
And with your beavers, you're more localized with your waterways and lakes or rivers and streams. And beaver management is more for like timber.
Okay.
I work for timber companies as well as private landowners, but I spend most of my year, beavers are not, there's no closed season on them in Mississippi. So it's a year-round thing.
Okay.
And then the hogs as well, I stay busy with them year-round.
I would imagine so.
Oh, yeah.
And again, I don't think I'm seeing ghosts, but I'm pretty sure I've started to see them at times from the highway, which I used to didn't see that.
Yeah.
Like Highway 82 at Kilmichael, there's a place where recently I saw one as big as this table laying dead on the side of the road. I don't think I'd ever seen that before.
Yeah. The numbers are increasing, but the hogs are smart, and they're just a real smart animal.
Yeah.
And the more they're messed with by people that don't know what they're doing, they get even smarter.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to really be on your toes when you're fooling with hogs. And thermal, people using thermal at night, shooting them like that helps a lot. And you got to use every tool at your disposal when you're fooling with them.
Yeah. So for a kid who's traps his first beaver at 8 years old, and then we look at the span of your life and the career and where it's taken you, it sounds like for you it might have just been a dream job and sort of a dream kind of life.
Oh, it is. Now I will say this: you don't make any money, but when you doing what you love and getting paid for it and can make a living, which I always had. When I was game warden, I trapped. On my days off or time off, I never stopped trapping and hunted and fished just like everybody else. But one thing that is really great with this job and this agency is the camaraderie that you get from the other officers. And we had fun. I mean, I hate to say it like that, but we got to go out and work together and make friends. And even some of the guys that I worked undercover, one of them now that he spent 5 years in federal penitentiary. I was teaching a trapping school. We have a trappers college every year. And I was teaching at that, and I looked and I saw him standing in the corner, and I thought, oh, this is going to be bad. And anyway, he came over and spoke to me. And I had talked to him while he was in jail a little bit. And anyway, we got to talking at the trappers college. I shouldn't have done it, but I gave him my phone number. If he needed anything, give me a call. He called me and wanted to meet with me, which wasn't a good idea. So I told him finally after he called several times, I said, well, I'll meet with you, but I said, you got to meet with me on Sunday at church.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So he met with me at church, and I actually started coming to church, and I got him to be our speaker at our wild game supper that year. And we're good friends to today. And he's young. He's a lot younger than I am, but my son and him are very close friends now. He wound up working at a taxidermist shop with the son of the prosecutor that put him in prison.
Wow.
So it's a small world, but I made a lot of good friends, even with the bad guys.
Isn't that
and that
something?
was probably one of the hardest things about that job was sometimes you stay undercover and work somebody for 2 years. They're just doing something that they grew up doing or just made a bad choice, whatever it may be, but there's still people on the inside just like we are. So.
Yeah. And with the ability to change.
Yep.
As well. So I think, that's probably part of your story and other people like you who may have worked in law enforcement that probably doesn't get told or highlighted enough that there is a compassion angle to it as well for the people that you come in contact with, that you came in contact with.
Oh, yeah. I had so many people that, like I said, I became very good friends with that they'll still call me today. People that I'll tell you one funny story, though, that my daddy was a wing shooter. He could shoot a dove. If he carried a box of shells out there, if it was 24 in it, he was going to bring 23 birds out of the field. And I know that's over the limit, but that's the way he did. And but we had gotten invited to a dove field, and I was just a teenager, and there was a couple of law enforcement officers there, and my daddy asked the man, he said, "Now, do we need to stop at the limit?" And the guy said, "No." He said, "You don't have anything to worry about. So you just shoot all you want. Don't worry about it. Nobody's going to mess with you on my field." So anyway, we probably shot quite a few birds, and my daddy came up to me and he said, "Let's get out of here." He was mad. And we didn't get checked, but we all had probably over the limit. And my daddy never shot over the limit again. He was so mad because those men were sitting there and they weren't doing their job. He said, "I'm paying them to do that." And that kind of put me on the road to wanting to be a game warden. And I tell you that story to tell you later on in my career, I bumped into that same group of people. And I went to the field, and I couldn't find it. I could hear them shooting, but I couldn't find the field. And I parked my truck, and I said, well, I'm just going to walk to it. And as I'm walking, I passed this old house trailer, and I was committed by the time I walked across the yard. I thought the people would be asleep. I heard some women talking, and I looked around, and which I had a camo jacket on. And one of the ladies said, "Are you looking for the dove field?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, I'm late." She said, "Well, just keep following that little trail across the field, and it'll take you to the dove field." Well, I get there, and that was probably the biggest case I ever made with over limits. Everybody on the field but 2 had over the limit of birds. And they bring me out of the field on a 4-wheeler. I got all their birds, and when we pull up to the trailer, which all the hunters are following us out, well, the lady asked, she said, "Did you find them?" And I was on the buggy with her husband. And he said, "You told the game warden where we were?" And she said, "Well, I didn't know it was game warden." Well, to this day, I'm still friends with those guys. They all paid their tickets, and actually they've invited me to come hunting several times, but I trap on their property.
Okay.
Still to this day.
Isn't that something?
And I think that has a lot to do with people, the way they handle things,
Sure.
Just, and we're taught that as game wardens. You got to approach people as people.
Right.
So, now, not to say you don't make enemies too, but
sure,
you got plenty of those as well.
That's bound to happen.
Yeah.
But it sounds like just your experience and probably others like you through experience have learned if you approach it in a certain way, more often than not, you're going to come out of it okay.
Oh, yeah.
You approach it a certain way. That's really interesting. And the trapping, okay, when we've talked to Larry Pugh fishing and talking to folks who hunt, the stories always seem to start with a daddy, a granddaddy, somebody that introduced you to it as a child. It all starts right there. It seems like, and it did for you too.
Oh, yeah. My father, now he didn't trap, but my granddaddy ran a bait shop.
Okay.
So I was there.
Where was that?
It was on Highway 471, just outside of Brandon, just south of Brandon. I mean, north of Brandon.
Okay.
And anyway, all the hunters and fishermen and game wardens, everybody came by the bait shop to sit around, drink coffee or whatever. And one guy that trapped would come by and he would be showing what he had caught that day. And that just intrigued me as a kid. Mm-hmm. And he actually gave me a couple of traps. Back then, nobody would teach you about it. And everything I learned mostly from a book and by trial and error. And it just grew from there. And once my daddy saw I could make a few dollars at it, that's what I'd get for Christmas every year with traps. So that turned out real well too. So.
Yeah. So he sort of fed your interest.
Oh, yeah. He always encouraged me to stay outside. So
Yeah. Staying outside, and that's sort of a generational thing. I heard a guy who's a comedian, one of my favorite comedians, but the way he described it is, I identified with it. He said, when we were kids, our mom or our dad would tell us to go outside and then would shut the door and lock it behind us. You couldn't come inside if you wanted to. And if you got thirsty, you drank from the water hose, I guess, if you were by the house. Otherwise, you went and found some somewhere.
Right. And, well, just the time of being out and just staying busy, finding something to do.
Sure.
Now, that's not quite the way people are, but in our day, you had to find something to do like that.
Sure. So in your world now here in animal, nuisance animal control, what's your life like day to day? Is it a 5-day-a-week job for you? Is it kind of seasonal? How does that work?
It's at least 6 days, and sometimes on Sunday afternoon.
Year round?
Yeah.
Year round.
I mean, I take off. I also get to go. A good friend of mine, Woody Reeves, introduced me to a place he was working, and I've been working in Wyoming some on a ranch out there guiding. Okay. So I get to do that a little bit in the fall. And
you touched on it earlier, but I said, so how does a kid from Brandon, Mississippi, develop the skills and the knowledge that you're guiding on hunts in Colorado in college and in Wyoming and in those kinds of places? How do you develop that?
Well, like I said, I sold my rifle to go on a bow hunt. My daddy told me I was crazy, but like I said, after I killed something, I didn't want to sit around the camp. So I asked the guy if I could help him find the deer. And just, I would say, skills that are learned as a hunter. And, I told the man I worked for in Colorado one time, I said, if I brought some of my friends out here, y'all wouldn't have any deer or elk. Because those were the dumbest things I'd ever seen. I said, Mississippi whitetails and turkeys are a whole lot sharper. Yeah. I said, you can't see them a mile away like you can out here, and then figure out which way the wind's blowing and stalk them. Right. So I think growing up hunting in thick, dense, wooded areas and then going out to the mountains, I'd never seen an elk before. Mm-hmm. And the next year I was guiding for them. And if you can call up a turkey, you can call up an elk. So,
so it does translate.
Oh yeah, actually, I started using turkey calls for an elk bugle, and wasn't but 2 years later I found out they were making elk bugles out of turkey diaphragm calls, because that's what I was using back then. And somebody saw me using a piece of PVC pipe with a turkey call.
Wow,
to bugle for elk, and that caught on as a call. Somebody did anyway.
And in Wyoming, it's elk, it's antelope.
Antelope and mule deer. Uh-huh. The biggest thing on the ranch that I get to do are the antelope hunts around the water holes and things like that, archery hunts.
Yeah.
I was a big bow hunter growing up. I loved to bow hunt. So.
Okay. Years ago as a kid, our church went on a mission trip to Wyoming, went to Rawlings one year, went to Moorcroft, Wyoming one year. I got to go. My dad was involved with, the construction stuff. So I remembered way off in the distance, you'd see an antelope. And it to me, as a kid, I was from Alabama. It seemed like something from a movie.
Right.
And I also remember picking up a shed from an antelope, little, shed about that tall. And I was fascinated with that. And the other memory I have of Wyoming would be a humongous dust storm that blew up one day on that construction site. That when I say dust storm, I mean couldn't see your hand in front of your face. In the middle of the day, it blows up in that dust, the wind blowing. Again, like out of a movie. My dad sent me to the church van, and I jumped in and shut the door. And within a few minutes, it was dark. It was like out of a scary movie. Every now and then, a hand would hit the window and go scooting by on the window, somebody looking to get out of that. And when that finally settled down, my dad and the guys that kind of got caught out in it, it was like they had makeup all over them. It was so fine. And, it was like somebody had put that fine powder makeup. It's a whole different set of conditions you have to deal with in a place like that versus really how great a place Mississippi is with what we have to deal with from a hunting and fishing standpoint.
And even working undercover, I got to go back and work in Idaho. Wow. Undercover out there. They were calling on us here in Mississippi to apprehend some folks that were hunting illegally in Idaho, but they were from the South.
Okay.
And them being from the South, they were looking for somebody. And I just always say it was a good Lord's blessing because I already had a little bit of knowledge. I'd hunted in the bitter roots of Idaho as well as a kid. I mean, I'd spend everything I made in Colorado and go to Idaho. So and I'd have to call Daddy to help me get home.
Yeah.
But that all, I believe, just good Lord's work from the standpoint of, learning a little bit about it when I was a kid and then being able to go back and work as a law enforcement officer for the state of Idaho, actually, which it turned into a federal investigation as well. And we had cases that went from Mississippi to Idaho, Mississippi to North Dakota, a lot in Arkansas, Louisiana, and Alabama and Tennessee, surrounding states, Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and I did say North Dakota was one of the biggest duck cases we ever made.
Really?
And it started right here in Jackson.
Really? So from Jackson to North Dakota?
Yeah, well, it went from Jackson to North Dakota to Texas to Louisiana and Arkansas.
Wow.
So it wound up being a real big case that took down quite a few individuals across the country. And it all, like I said, it started on a wildlife case here in Mississippi.
How about that?
And got to see the country all in that, while I was working as well.
It sounds like you saw most of it.
Oh, yeah. Got to see. We had one case, went to Alaska. I didn't do it, but another one of our undercover agents did. So,
and again, as you mentioned, though, you talk about those experiences, and it just sort of echoes as I hear you tell those stories. A young kid from Mississippi, and you look at your life and those experiences and others and think, you can actually get paid to do that?
Yeah.
It's an actual job. I can't imagine anything any more fun or adventurous for that matter.
No, I take you back to when I had my interview. I don't know if y'all know him, but it was Jack Herring, Harry Barkley, and John, I can't remember his last name, but several of the older guys when I was straight out of college. And the guys there were, after the interview, I'd never been on an actual interview before. And they got down to the last question. I'll never forget Jack Herring asked Harry Barkley, do you have any questions for this boy? And he said, what size boots do you wear? And the only thing I could think of, I said, I'll wear whatever size you got. And that was the last question they asked me. But I didn't know if that was a trick question or what, but that's how bad I wanted to work for the Department of Wildlife. And I would say it was probably one of the best choices I ever made.
Wow. It's such an interesting, I could think of a million questions. I could keep you here all night. and I'm sure some folks might hope that we could do that. Kenny, you mentioned you do speaking.
Yep.
How often are you out doing those kind of speaking engagements, delivering those?
Well, I speak every week, but which I teach Sunday school and I preach also at a nursing home, but I get invited a lot to speak at churches. So,
if someone were to hear this and want you to come, how do they reach out to you?
Well, they could find on Facebook. They can reach out to my wife. I don't do a whole lot of Facebook, so but I can give my phone number out, I guess. Whatever.
Yeah, we could put it on the screen.
Okay. That would be the easiest way to contact me, and just leave me a voicemail if I don't answer. I may be in a water hole with a beaver somewhere, but
right. Sounds like you probably are.
Yep.
You said 6 days a week, sometimes 7.
I was there this morning. So
how about that?
But
the beaver trapping seasonally, like we just had this really cold weather. I live in North Mississippi. We dealt with ice for a week. And then, of course, in the summertime, we'll deal with 100 degrees in the shade and mosquitoes. Like, is it a time of year that it's better or worse?
Right now is the best time.
Okay, the cold weather.
Cold weather, they're just more active. Okay. And what it is in the summertime, there's a lot more vegetation for them to eat on, so they're just like everybody else. When there's food everywhere, they're not going to walk very far. But when food starts getting scarce, they're going to go to hunting food.
Yeah.
Plus, which I'll do nuisance alligator work still for the state, and I get calls for that during the summertime as well. So I never have an empty day.
I saw a story that was shared on Twitter or X. It's about a month or two ago. I saw it. I clicked it. I read it. It all looked legit to me about a beaver experience. I still don't know if I believe it or not. But it had to do with parachuting way back in the old days. They trapped and caught a bunch of beavers and then parachuted them into an area out west. I think it was Utah. That's hard to get into. And they transformed that place by damming it up. Of course, water stands. And next thing you know, we got greenery where we didn't have it. So that's a real story.
Oh, yeah. They did that. Yep. Actually, beaver were relocated in Mississippi. Some folks would probably like to find the politician that did it. So I don't know when that happened, but at one time, I mean, in the 1800s, beavers were nearly wiped out in the United States.
Really?
Because of the beaver market has come back right now because of the show Yellowstone. So many people don't realize those felt hats. If you look inside of it and it says XXX beaver or whatever, that's actual beaver that they're being made from. So the hatter market has brought, or the movie Urban Cowboy was the last time beaver prices went up.
Okay.
Yeah, the movie Urban Cowboy.
Right, yeah.
Now with the series, which I've never seen it, but Yellowstone, they say that is causing people to buy cowboy hats and cowboy boots again. So therefore, the beaver market is going back up. But other than that, the fur prices are pretty much nil. I mean, fur is really dropped due to the antis over the last several years, and people just not wanting to wear fur coats because if somebody say something to them about that poor little animal. But in essence, they're managing wildlife by, I mean, that's what we're supposed to do is harvest the animals. No trapper wants them to go extinct, as well as a hunter. You want to have something to hunt and you want to have something to trap. So, you're going to manage them to the best of, so you can enjoy it from now on and the next generation enjoy it.
Sure. Sure. Well, Kenny, last thing, and I know you've been retired since 2009, but had a career in law enforcement. In a place like Mississippi, what's maybe the number one thing that we're dealing with illegally that people are doing? The title of the book, Poacher's Nightmare, that for those poachers, for those people, what's going on that's really enemy number one in terms of, breaking the law in our outdoors?
I would say probably right now, the biggest thing, people are trying to manage for big bucks.
Okay.
And that was one of the last big cases that we worked. People going out at night, poaching big bucks, or, one they couldn't get otherwise, or if they see him standing on the side of the road. And those are the hardest ones to catch because they may be hunting here. We had guys that would travel 5 counties in a night.
Wow.
Just looking for a big buck. They wanted to shoot a big buck.
Yeah.
They wouldn't, and they may just cut his head off. Whereas a landowner or a hunting club been managing that deer for several years to get him to that size, and then somebody just come along, and if they shoot and he doesn't fall right there, well, they just move on to the next one, where they may shoot 3 deer before they get one. And it's hard to catch those kind of people. That's where you need covert individuals or undercover officers working them, and they're just a lot easier to catch that way than just it being in uniform and apprehending them while they're in the act of doing it. But the meat market is still very viable. As long as there's people that'll buy something, somebody's going to go out and pick it up and sell it.
Yeah.
The meat market, as far as deer and crappie, the fish market, crappie is a delicious fish to eat, as we all know here in the South. But when it gets taken up north, it really becomes an item that people want, and they'll sell it under another name, so they can slip it into the grocery stores that way.
Right. And so to get a handle on all that, we need to call the poacher's nightmare.
Oh, yeah.
Either
You make sure you let your local game warden know. I don't know about this poacher's nightmare anymore, but
Right.
make sure you let your game warden. I've used to tell people all the time, they would complain about stuff. I'd say, well, when did you call the game warden? Or when I was a game warden, I'd say, I had never heard from you until I see you at the coffee shop. Why don't you call me and tell me? So if you don't report wildlife violations, I mean, a game warden's got a whole big county to work, and there's generally no more than 2 in a county. If he's not getting the reports of the violations or knowing where he needs to go work, then chances are he won't work it. He's going to go where the calls are coming about.
Right.
So,
Well, and that's one thing we discussed in some other podcast episodes of really that's almost a message that sometimes we don't repeat enough. And that is to our outdoorsmen here in the state,
Right.
our folks or landowners, you can call. You can walk right up to the office. You can call the main office. You can call your local game warden. Never hesitate to call or go by and have a conversation.
I used to always tell folks, don't complain if you're not picking up the phone and calling and telling somebody. Don't just tell me 2 weeks later and say, why hadn't you called him?
Yeah.
You know, and that's where they need to do, these officers today. Let them know, and they'll do what they can to catch you. So
Yeah. That's great. Kenny, thank you.
thank you.
Pleasure
I've
to
enjoyed
talk
it.
to you. That's Kennie Prince. His book is Poacher's Nightmare. You can look it up on Amazon and other places where you can find books. And I'll be the first one to walk out of here and go get a copy and read it myself. I'm Matt Wyatt. Thanks for listening to Mississippi Outdoors Podcast, and we'll see you outdoors.